Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this live event. We're here this afternoon to discuss all things teacher development, and even more excitingly, to launch our new professional development tools, UnityPD. My name is Haili Hughes, and I'm the Head of Education at Iris Connect. And joining me this afternoon is our MD, Andy Newell, who'll be talking you through what our new product is all about a bit later on. Our Director of Technology, Matt Newell, who'll give you a demo of what our new platform interface looks like, will also be with us before passing over to me to take you through some of our PD tools. And this will be followed by a panel discussion on some of the pertinent issues in teacher professional development with Professor Sam Twistleton and our very special guest, Tim Brighouse, as well. So there'll also be a chance to ask any questions that you might have at the end as well. So if at any point during this event you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat and we'll respond to some of them at the end. And if you are on Twitter at the moment, please do tweet out, please do tag us at iris_connect. Tag us in anything that you get at all. Please reshare our live stream as well. But first, we are delighted to welcome a very special guest to deliver our keynote address. Now, Sir Tim Brighouse really needs no introduction. He's had an absolutely illustrious career of over 60 years in education. He's served as a school teacher, a deputy head, a professor of education, a CEO in local education authorities, an advisor and schools commissioner for London, where he led the London Challenge. And we're delighted to have Tim with us to speak about building teacher expertise. Hi, Tim, and
Hi.
welcome. It's really nice to see you again. And I'll hand over to you.
Okay, well, that's really, really good. I've got a presentation which you can see. So if you want to look through it, and I'm sure you could get a copy of it afterwards if you want, and it won't be too long either. So I've called the thing. The next one up is that it was once commented that, can you imagine, just by being in a particular school, you'll either become a successful or an unsuccessful teacher. And it wasn't me who said it, but I've taken that as my kind of main headline because I want to focus on what happens in school. And I want to be quite clear that it's what happens in school that's even more important than what happens between schools, because the in-school variation in outcomes is 8 times greater than the between-school variation. And that's not to say that working with other schools isn't important. It's incredibly important because you get good ideas that way that just multiply your intellectual curiosity, without which you're not going to achieve much as a teacher, or at least that's my experience. So there's that famous Gino quote, which many of you will know, that I've come to the frightening conclusion that it's what I do every day in the classroom that makes the difference. I can hurt with humour, I can humiliate or create circumstances that are brilliant for children. I create a climate and create the weather in a school and set the climate of what's going to happen. And we all know that's true in the classroom with our youngsters, but we also know that how our department behaves and how our school behaves, or if we're in a multi-academy trust, how our multi-academy trust behaves, also affects whether it's likely that we're going to make good weather or not. So I want to focus on inside the classroom. And just to remind myself, I've put on the next slide the 4 circumstances that I think makes it likely that teachers will be at their best. The first thing is, I'm not sure these are in the right order actually, because if I had to go for one above others, it would be the permitting circumstances. Now, by permitting circumstances, I mean working in a school where you're not going to get bawled out if you decide to do something creative on your own account and it goes wrong, but somebody will reflect on with you about why it went wrong and use it as a building point for being successful. So I think the climate of the school within which you're working is key. That's why I made the point right at the beginning. Secondly, I think you need new experiences. It's only by experiences that you're going to learn or how I've certainly learned, is through having experiences and then reflecting on them afterwards, and perhaps then reading about something. So is there a case, therefore, for really focusing on how teachers are working within a school? I certainly enjoy responsibility, and that's leading. So I think every teacher should be a leader of some sort, not merely within their individual classroom, but within their department. They should be responsible for something, or within their phase in a primary school, or if you now got to cover your curriculum, that will be true also in a primary school. But above all, teachers need respect and recognition. Now, all those are vitally affected by how the school is run. And going to the next one, Judith Little, a woman in America, coming up with a proposition. She said, you know, you're in a good department, when she used school, but a good department, a phase team, or a school where these things happen. And reflect on this. Is this true of your school? And with each one, what could you do to make that more likely to happen rather than less likely to happen? So teachers talking about teaching as opposed to social talk. So how do we make sure that that happens? Do meetings have talking about teaching within them? Do we observe each other teach? And by that I mean having time out, and I'll give two illustrations shortly of how that could happen. But above all, when I look at observing each other teach, somebody once said to me when I first came across Iris Connect, which was, well, I can observe myself. And of course you can observe yourself by using Iris Connect. And many of you who are looking at this know exactly the potential that Iris Connect has in magnifying the observing each other teach. So you can observe your own teaching. If you're facilitated to go and visit another teacher and observe there, you are going to pick up all sorts of pedagogical tricks. And I'll turn to the pedagogy in a minute. Do teachers teach each other? In other words, are there opportunities for teachers reflecting on what they do about questioning, pair work, group work, feedback that's successful? And do you plan, organise and evaluate together rather than singly? That is to say, does the school organise itself so that you can do things together and bounce ideas off each other rather than doing it as a lone individual? And if I move to the next slide, you'll see that I'm reflecting on, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and I think it is worth reflecting about this. I think that there are 7 aspects of teaching at least, which we ought to think a lot about. First of all, it's the obvious one. You're an instructor, a deliverer of lessons. Indeed, you may now be in the position of thinking, well, that's the one that's emphasized. It's the one that's looked at. It's the one that used to preoccupy Ofsted. And I assess pupils' work and I deliver lessons as a whole class teacher. And it's a whole class instructional exercise. I'm making that point and then assessing how it's gone. Indeed, sometimes you hear stuff from the DFE and you think it is entirely to do with delivering lessons. Indeed, occasionally you get courses of in-service training that are delivering lessons. Yet if you look at the likelihood of delivering something sticking, it's less than it would be. Now, you're a diagnostician. What does this class need next? What does the individual need next? And you're a tutor because you work with 1 or 2 at a time on the same instructional assessment thing in order to make sure that children are understanding. You're often a navigator of learning, of making sure that youngsters know what the next stage of learning is, or whether they could get it by using ICT, or whether they should look at a book, or whether they ought to work with somebody else, whatever it is, you're an expert navigator, links to the diagnostician. You're a counsellor. You often think, well, I'm not paid to be a counsellor, but you often are. If you've ever been on, used the minibus and been the driver, you'll know what I mean by that, namely that a kid will sit near you and start talking to you as though you're the driver. But really what they're trying to do is to tell you lots of things that are happening. And I give that as an illustration, but it happens all the time, particularly in primary schools. Less so in secondary schools. There are fewer opportunities for counselling in secondary schools. And just at the moment, because of things that are happening outside the school, people are very, very concerned about that. And then you're a coach, aren't you? PE staff will be aware of that. But you're a coach. Anybody who's learning a skill requires a coach to shape the development of their skills, whether it's as a leader or whether it's as whether it's mastering the early stages of a particular skill in language or whatever it may be. And finally, you're a mentor. You're the person to some kids, not to all kids, but you're a mentor who says, Jane, you know, perhaps have you thought about looking at so-and-so or going to talk to so-and-so? I know that it's the mentors in my life that have made the most difference, and I could name them, but I won't, to what is required. Now, I think a teacher's doing all of that, and therefore, does CPD cover all that, or is it absolutely dominated by the instruction, the tutor, and the teaching, not of those discrete activities? And if I move to the next slide, I'd be saying, wait a minute, if you were thinking of those 7 bows to your pedagogical activity, changes in ICT and artificial intelligence have made a huge change to my instructional and assessing activities. So changes in ICT mean that if I were to if I were a pupil and saying, look, I'm sorry, miss, I really didn't understand that last bit. Can you go over it again? You will go over it again. But now you're able, aren't you, through ICT to show different people going over the same thing that a youngster has not understood. You're also able to have a delivery of an activity or even a lesson by other people that may substitute for what you may do. I'm trying to make the point that ICT and AI will make a huge difference to the early strings to the bow that I gave on the last slide. Meantime, of course, mental health and social conditions have meant that your job as a counsellor has increased enormously. And that's where we're feeling the gap, particularly at the moment, post-pandemic and in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So what do you do? What does the school do about that to enable you not to be snowed under by those particular magnified activities just at the moment? And finally, of course, government requirements that may come in from the outside, affecting the curriculum, and accountability arrangements are always dominating you, and they will be changing if the focus is entirely on the instructional, and it tends to be on the instructional and the assessment. Then you are going to be adjusting there and using ICT and AI for all it's worth in order to get the best out of the situation. If I move on to the next slide, and I promise I'm nearly done, I've come up with a baker's dozen of practical CPD ideas that I think are worth thinking about. The first is making sure job descriptions are written in terms of lead and support responsibilities. By that I mean, don't make job descriptions a whole list of duties with that awful one at the end, which makes you all despair. It certainly made me despair, and such other duties as may be required from time to time. I mean, you're a lead, And in a department, you will be the leader of a department or the leader of a phase, but people will also have support responsibilities. I may be a leader in a particular department, but I'm also teaching in another department, and there I have a support responsibility. What are those lead and support responsibilities? The emphasis being on responsibility, because back to that original slide of teachers needing respect, recognition, responsibilities, new experiences, and in a climate that's supportive. Secondly, keep, and now this may well be, I'm personally still in favour, notwithstanding electronic developments, which means things can be digitally and are digitally snowing me under. I'm in favour when it comes to a school staff handbook describing teaching responsibilities that it's loose-leafed as well as being there, so that I can quickly look at it and have it available. Sorry if I'm very old style in that respect, but I believe that what's written in that staff guide, how it's written, will vitally affect the climate in a school. Thirdly, is there a staff library? And is it all about teaching, learning, and so on? Do we use meeting time to talk about teaching and learning? Do we use one of the 5 inset days to enable staff in pairs or threes to visit some other school? Lots of schools I know do that and swear that it's really, really important. If I move on from that to get to number 5 and 6 on this baker's dozen of practical ideas, there's an example in the 5th one of what I would say is enabling teachers to observe others teach. Well, clearly, if SLT takes over the teaching of some department for a day, they can then focus on the observation of another's teaching. They might, if it's a secondary school, they might go off to a different school and have a look to see how they're organizing there. If it were in a primary school, it might be the head of the school in November taking over somebody's teaching of a year 3 class, so they can buzz off and go into year 4, see which kids have become becalmed, which have taken off, and have the opportunity to see how another teacher organizes the classroom. So it's enabling the observation to happen. And by the way, it's what I would call a low effort, high impact intervention. On the 6th one, teach meets have happened, but I think they've fallen into abeyance after the pandemic, which I think is a pity, because the teach meets I've observed have been occasions when people from a number of schools have got together. The deal is that you speak for 2 to 5 minutes. You bounce an idea, usually low effort, high impact. And if you do go to a teach meet, I'd be amazed if you don't come back with at least one idea that's worth thinking about and have a discussion about. And I've make it part of the annual performance management discussions, mainly because it seems to me that those performance management discussions ought to be dominated by developmental CPD rather than anything else. The 7th one is a nod to my hosts today, which is Iris Connect. I always remember coming across Iris Connect for the very first time, probably a decade ago, in Essex, when they had a stall up. I was talking to the secondary heads. They didn't know me, the Iris Connect people, at all, but I've kept in touch with them since. But they came up to me and they wanted to sell me Iris Connect. So I explained, well, I'm not really a head and I'm only here to give a talk. But I said, do come in and listen, because the point was that I was going to run through those Judith Little points that I made at the beginning and emphasize that observing each other teach, I can't think of a better tool to make sure that that's happening than Iris Connect. And I go on to the last, 8, 9, 10 and 11. of these baker's dozen has somebody designated as subject knowledge coach who keeps abreast of developments in the subject. And by the way, would I alter that now? Would I be asking myself the question, well, wait a minute, how about all those other aspects of the teacher's bow? How am I developing mentoring? So what I'm really saying is there needs to be a conscious development to increase our knowledge of pedagogical skill. Subject knowledge is one, but there'll be others. And so the ninth one is the pedagogical coach. And do we need that? And by the way, Iris Connect can be used in that respect. Do we have a fund available for courses, but only send pairs or threesomes and include in staff faculty meetings time for reporting back? Personally, I think that courses tend, and I've contributed to so many, where I've often thought, well, look, this is like mist on a hot summer's morning. It's going to evaporate, even if I do it well, and I'm now at the point where I don't do it much well, it's not going to be remembered. So I would say that one of the things that is really important is what, if the course is going to be attended, what difference is it going to be make, and write it down, and then 6 months afterwards ask yourself, what was the result of that course? Fine. On the 11th point, and don't forget Baker's doesn't go to 13, so I shall be on last two in a second, but you can't overdo the thanks to members of staff. And unless you're working in a school where that's happening a lot, then you're going to get stressed far more. You do need to be appreciated, and it's private and it's individual, and it may be a note, it may be a card, it may be an email, it may be all sorts of things, and it needs to recognize in particular people who are giving the extra mile. And how do you celebrate or acknowledge privately everybody's birthday and their private, personal, individual needs? And going on to the final slide of these baker's dozen, have we got a wellbeing fund for staff? And I do that. Are there theatre tickets and restaurant vouchers? I can see some of the audience rubbing their hands and thinking, well, that's a good idea. So put it to the school that you ought to have it. And finally, and by the way, he isn't recently retired. I said he's recently retired, and that's because I'm growing so old that I think things that happened yesterday really happened 10 years ago. I'm talking about the head of Tower Hamlets, Alistair MacDonald, and he said once, and I've never forgotten it, was, well, what do you think's the most important thing that you did? And he gave this as the answer, that when people ask, could you do something, he always wanted to say yes. And that was to create permitting circumstances. Incredibly important. And then I'll come to my last slide, you'll be very pleased to hear, and that is a comment about a teacher from Henry Brooke Adams. Now look, I've got 20 damn good quotes from teachers, and my email is Tim Brighouse with nothing in between at yahoo.co.uk. And I want to say that my last message to you is this. You remember those things where it used to say bill posters will be prosecuted? And I always used to have the joke, as everybody did, well, who's bill posters? And so on. But I want you to be bill posters. What I want you to do, in my last begging of you, wherever you are, in whichever school you're doing, drop me an email. I'll send you 20 teacher quotes. Take one of them, turn it into an A3 sheet, and put it on the staff notice board to remind staff or the faculty or the phase, because I know staff rooms are now faded out of importance in some schools, but put it where lots of teachers will see it so that they can take inspiration that they do change young people's lives. And above all, they need a bottomless well of intellectual curiosity. And I hope some of these in-school processes will help all teachers who see this live in an environment in which that's more likely to happen rather than less likely to happen. Now I'm going to shut up and pass to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Tim. I don't think you kept saying all the way through that. You'll be happy to know that this is the end. I don't think people will be happy to know because that was so useful and so interesting. And I loved your idea about the quotation as well. I used to do a similar thing. I had a display behind me where I had all the cards that kids had got me with amazing messages in. And, you know, when you have that really rocky day that you sometimes have as a teacher, and I used to look behind me, you know, and sometimes read some of those messages on those cards. So I think it really does work. Thanks again, Tim, and that's not the last we'll be seeing of you. You'll be joining us a bit later on for our panel as well. So we're moving on now, and I'm delighted to welcome the co-founder of Iris Connect, Andy Newell, and he's going to share some of the research behind what we've been working on for our new UnityPD tools. Over to you, Andy.
Well, thanks, Haili. That's a kind introduction. Give me 1 second. Okay, so yeah, I'd like to spend a little bit of time with everyone today just talking about some of the thinking and research which underpins all of the developments that you'll see today on Iris Connect. So as an organisation, we've been working in schools for about 13 years, focused on providing tools for teachers to reflect and collaborate. So why are we so focused on education? Ultimately, it's because education has never been more important. The future is uncertain, but there is one thing we can predict, and that's that the next 50 years will be challenging, perhaps uniquely so. Tim mentioned AI there. Anyone who's engaged with ChatGPT will know that there's sort of disruption coming from that angle. We've got climate considerations and a range of other things. So we really need to raise a generation of adaptive, compassionate experts to meet these challenges. It's a practical and moral necessity. So imagine if every child, irrespective of where they were born, their innate abilities, academic or vocational preferences reached their full potential. Imagine the world they could build and the challenges that they could address. So that's what drives us. And I've yet to meet a great teacher or school leader who doesn't share that same drive. Oh, bear with me 1 second. 30 years ago, expressing a dream like that could have probably been legitimately dismissed as being unrealistic. But I believe that now we're at an inflection point where for the first time, I think we know what needs to be done and also how to do it. Recent educational research has really given us some insights, and modern technology has given us the tools. So recent educational research has given us a far more detailed picture of what matters in education. New schools are nice, certain technologies can help, structural reforms are sometimes of value, but if we really want to shift the dial for learners, the following matters most. An increasingly well-defined set of learning experiences, delivered by an unbroken chain of expert teachers, and an evidence-based and professional development to support them to be just that. There was recently a question on TeacherTapp asking teachers if they'd rather be described as effective or expert. And there was this really strong preference for effective. At first, we wondered whether we should adapt our language here in order to not put people off. And then we reflected. We see expert teaching every day. Expert teaching exists. Why are pilots, dentists, lawyers happy to be considered an expert? And yet there's this reticence from teachers. Personally, I think it's underpinned by two things. Firstly, an inherent kind of modesty about a profession that deals with uncertainty every day. And also, I think we've got not a very evolved definition of expertise, and that's something I'd like to speak to later. So first of all, let's look at those learning experiences, the first step of that chain. Looking at the data from randomized control trials and the meta-analysis of those trials, it's all a bit messy. There are different categorizations, outlier results, concerns about methodologies, etc. But there is signal in the noise, a kind of informative overlap between those findings. So what makes an expert learning experience? What does the evidence tell us? It tells us that classroom management, instruction, guided practice, questioning, assessment and feedback, talk and collaboration all matter in classrooms. We don't consider this list exhaustive or the final word, rather the start of a conversation with the education system, nor are we saying teachers who do all of those things are necessarily experts. No, expertise is a deeper phenomenon than that. Rather, let's see this as the instructional palette from which an expert teacher uses their deep understanding of learners and learning to select, adapt, and refine an appropriate blend of experiences for their context. So that's the deeper level we're talking about. For too long, the education system has sought solutions at the superficial kind of experience level. If only teachers did X and Y, then learning would improve. This is a true embodiment of the, if all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail, because we have historically lacked the tools or scale to reliably or scalably operate PD at the level of noticing, adapting, and refining. Programs and priorities have therefore necessarily focused on the mechanical and the prescriptive. So what is expertise? Let's dig in a little bit more. There are lots of definitions of expert teaching, usually centered on style or values, but ultimately none are satisfactory. The simplest definition is this: expert teachers think in expert ways and do expert things. Let's explore this more at a cognitive level. Thinking and doing are governed by two systems in our brain: the declarative system, which stores knowledge and flexible interconnected information in something called a schema, and our procedural system, which stores skills in linear productions, if this, then that, which can't be fluidly reversed. It's the effective interplay of these two systems together which delivers expertise. While they're separate systems, they're intimately connected via our working memory. And we place stress on that working memory when A, productions and schema are being created, and B, when we're solving problems. To demonstrate this, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to try reciting the alphabet backwards. Challenging, isn't it? Fluency here would normally be driven by a procedural system, so the kind of if A then B thing. But production can't be fluidly reversed by our procedural system. Instead, you need to engage your declarative knowledge of the alphabet and create a representation of the problem in your working memory. This places a load on your working memory and limits what you can do in parallel. So expert thinking depends on fluid skills, and of course, skills need to be guided by a well-developed mental model, i.e. your thinking. So an example of this would be driving. An expert driver thinks in expert ways, i.e. they are accounting for the road conditions, and that informs expert skills like changing the gear or applying the brakes. Equally, the act of applying the brakes is effective, it's executed well, and doesn't require the driver to think about it. This leaves the driver with the cognitive space to continue noticing and thinking expertly, route planning, thinking about what they're going to do when they get there, etc. It follows that an expert teacher also has expert behaviors and an expert mental model. And of course, the effective use of one system is dependent on the effective fluidity of the other. So to illustrate, an expert teacher's questioning routines are fluid and place little demand on their working memory. This frees up their cognitive capacity to actually attend to what they are learning from the students and use their expertise to potentially adapt their instruction. It's this capacity to notice and adapt that's been shown by Wolf et al. To be one of the most significant differentiators between novice and expert teachers. So, expert teachers have an effective mental model of their task and detailed knowledge and skills relating to the instructional palette. Importantly, these skills are sufficiently fluid to enable the teacher to notice, reflect, and adapt their instruction based on the needs of their learners. So with this as our working definition of expert teaching, we must now turn to working out how we can get every teacher to that point. The research into professional development has historically been beset by many of the same challenges that we've seen in the space of trying to understand what we should be doing in classrooms. There's been a historical lack of large-scale meta-analysis, and it's been difficult for people to kind of see the wood for the trees. Consequently, professional development's been really faddy, with competing approaches coming in and out of fashion all the time, and sometimes with not that much evidence sitting behind them. But again, there is signal in the noise, an instructive narrative in the overlap between the findings of each research domain. So let's start by looking at the issue of effectiveness in the round. It's long been held that improvements in teacher performance plateau after a few years in the field. The good news is that in 2014, Kraft Pape demonstrated this isn't necessarily true. It was and showed that teachers working in environments characterized by peer collaboration, supportive leadership, high trust, effective feedback, and a decent professional development system continued to improve on average by 38% over teachers in low quality environments. So the narrative of this plateau is only really true of teachers in less supportive environments. So there's a lot to be digested in that for all of us. But let's focus in on that PD component, that professional learning component. So in 2020, Zucco and Fletcher Wood did just that. They looked at the impact of discrete high-quality CPD programs and found an effect size of 0.09 on learning outcomes. It doesn't sound huge, but this evidence suggests that PD has a greater effect on pupil attainment than other things that schools may consider, and certainly cheaper than some of the alternatives. So PD really matters, but what kind of PD? Their definition of quality was based on the DFE standard, namely that it was focused on improving student outcomes, was underpinned by robust evidence and expertise, included collaboration and expert challenge, and was sustained over time. They weren't just one-shot CPD sessions. So it moves us closer to a working definition, but it's not detailed enough to be instructive. So to do that, let's explore some outliers, i.e. programs which have showed large effect sizes. In 2018, Kraft-Blazar undertook a meta-analysis of instructional coaching randomized control trials. Combining the results together across 60 studies, they found pooled effect sizes of 0.18 on student achievement, which is pretty significant, albeit we've yet to see these outcomes replicated in a UK context. But the data is intriguing and worthy of deeper exploration. So let's dig into why it appears to work. One of the defining characteristics of instructional coaching is just that, the instructional coach, who can be seen as a powerful tool in the management of cognitive load through the process of skill acquisition and knowledge integration. When we're acquiring new skills, we tend to go through three distinct phases: the cognitive, the associative, and the autonomous. At each stage, the coach actively manages cognitive load by 1, sequencing, 2, controlling the performance environment, and 3, sharing mental models, 4, enabling rehearsal, and 5, providing actionable feedback and timely feedback. Let's look at this through the lens of skill acquisition in another domain where the fluid interplay of knowledge and skills is really important: driving. So let's think about our driving instructor. At the cognitive stage, what are they doing? They're managing the cognitive load by keeping it simple, keeping us on quiet roads with clear, simple instructions. They're modeling the car controls for us. They're giving us opportunities to practice and giving us corrective feedback. As we move into the associative stage, all my individual skills are becoming more routine. So the instructor increases the complexity of the environment, busier roads, practicing a broader range of connected skills. But the potential for cognitive overload here is really high because I'm trying to do all that and notice things that are going on in the world around me. So how do they help with this? Well, they share their mental model. They say things like, "Oh, can you see we're entering the high street? Reduce your speed," or "Probably time to change gear." At the autonomous stage, the last stage of this process, the learner is fluidly controlling the car and thinking for themselves, but the instructor's job is not done. They support the development of the learner's reflection skills and metacognition. They say, "How do you think that went? And let's focus on that roundabout for a minute. What was the problem there? What might you do differently next time?" Obviously, teaching isn't driving, but there's value in this analogy insofar as it demonstrates 3 things. 1, the importance of modeling, rehearsal, practice, and feedback. 2, how important a highly capable coach is to the management of cognitive load at each stage via an adaptive strategy mapped to the needs or the learning point of each individual learner. One size certainly doesn't fit all. And 3, how how vital it is for the instructor to have a clear view of what's going on. Imagine the state of our roads if the instructor spent most of their time blindfolded. So it's that ability to see practice on a regular basis that underpins this whole model. So coming back to that Kraft-Blazar meta-analysis, it wasn't all roses about instructional coaching. It highlighted some very significant challenges about bringing instructional coaching to scale. They found a negative correlation between program scale and its effects, citing the fact that it was expensive, around $5,000 per teacher, and the problems of recruiting adequate coaches to support the process, which makes sense because coaching requires deep expertise and we just don't have enough coaches. While coaching playbooks are a step in the right direction, great coaches are adaptive to the needs of their coachee, and there's no real substitute for expertise. So certainly at this time in the education system, it's fair to say that not every teacher can have an instructional coach, certainly within the current paradigm. So even if you have enough coaches, the observation is hard. That we're ending up with a situation where we've got a lot of people blindfolded trying to manage this because of the issues of lesson cover, travel, timetabling, etc. So perhaps it's not instructional coaching per se that's making the difference. Perhaps we need to look at the specific interactions which underpin effective PD so that we might be able to identify some other more scalable alternatives. In 2021, Sims et al. Conducted a meta-analysis of just this. What are the common features of PD programs that work? They identified 14 mechanisms that really make a difference. These were grouped into broad categories of building knowledge, motivating teachers, developing technique, and embedding practice. There are strong echoes here of the focus on skill and knowledge integration evident in instructional coaching. However, when they dug deeper, they found no statistically significant difference between instructional coaching, teacher learning communities, or lesson study in terms of outcomes. They can all bridge the gap in a way that is so vital to our definition of expertise. It's worth noting that the authors also concluded that these findings may explain some of the positive instructional coaching results, namely that it wasn't necessarily instructional coaching per se that led to the positive impact, but rather that instructional coaching is inherently rich in the mechanisms they described. So the implication is this, and it's a big one, is that other learning designs incorporating the same mechanisms could be equally effective. So the way is open to redefine professional development for teachers by A, enabling what already works, addressing the scalability issues at the heart of instructional coaching, and B, recombining those effective mechanisms to create new modalities better suited to the challenge of every teacher, reaching every teacher. So when it comes to instructional coaching, we think we've got a role to play. Video can reduce the cost per interaction at the heart of the scaling problem. People no longer have to be in the same place at the same time. This has implications both within a school, but also across a network of schools where professional coaches could realistically reach far more teachers than they could if travel was a consideration. The approach is actually we've been doing this a lot. It's happening at scale. For example, with a large-scale research study that we were involved in with mathematical policy research involving nearly 360 teachers. We supported remote delivery of a coaching program, and the net result was around 2 months of extra progress within the year for the learners based on just 5 cycles of instructional coaching. So the other thing about this is that technology has a role to play in connecting coaches together and providing them with maybe some more of the developmental opportunities necessary for us to scale our coaching base. If you're relying purely on memory, learning through reflection is hard due to the challenges of recollection and associative cognitive biases and all that sort of stuff, especially if you don't have access to theory and models and frameworks to guide the process. Technology has a role to play in addressing these challenges too. Videos can provide a holistic record of classroom practice to reflect on, and we can build knowledge and reflective processes and provide frameworks incorporating all of the mechanisms identified by the EEF. And finally, group learning is a powerful way of reaching large numbers of teachers all at the same time. Crucially, though, this learning must be infused with those important mechanisms we discussed earlier. So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about in more detail as things move on. So to summarize, if we define expertise as the fluid interplay of knowledge and skills, then we must adopt programs which have the right mechanisms to actually promote this. And while traditionally it would be hard to reach every teacher with such programs, a modern adaptive network approach using technology gives us not only the ability to reach everyone, but to do so in a way that goes beyond instructional coaching and embraces learning modalities better suited to every teacher in every school. So that's it. That's the background. Back to you, Haili.
Thanks so much for that, Andy. I really love that analogy you made about the driving instructor. That's something that you and I have been talking about quite a lot, isn't it, when we were sort of developing all of these new tools. And I find this idea of kind of teachers having sort of this palette of instructional strategies that they can call upon as a really interesting one, because I think increasingly, you know, we're seeing quite sort of directive policies about what makes excellent teaching, and I think we need to trust teachers to be those expert practitioners to be able to choose the approach that suits them best. So I found a lot of that really interesting. Thank you so much. And we're going to invite our panel on in just a second to discuss some of the themes of Tim's presentation that we saw earlier, some of Andy's presentation as well. And our panel is going to consist of Sir Tim Brighouse, who you met earlier, and Andy Newell, who's just chatted to us as well. We're also delighted to have Professor Sam Twistleton joining us as well. Now, Sam, if you don't know her, is the director of Sheffield Institute of Education, and she's a DFE expert advisor, has been sort of heavily involved in a lot of the teacher reforms that have gone on recently. The CCF, Sam, I think you were involved in, as well as some of the ITT market review. And Sam, I have to say, is a great influence to me. She was one of the amazing ladies in education that I sort of dedicated mentoring in schools, my book too. So I'm really delighted that she's made the time to come and join us here this afternoon. And all of our panelists have a huge amount of expertise in professional development and mentoring new teachers as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their views. So welcome everybody. I've got 3 questions that I'm going to put to you. I think we'll probably start off with Sam, I think, because we haven't heard from you yet. So our first question is, what are the challenges faced by school leaders when facilitating the development of staff?
Nice, easy, straightforward question.
Yeah, just solve the world, Sam, in one question. Yeah.
I mean, it's like a bit of an obvious answer in a way, that I think, you know, it's time and money. That all boils down to time and money, but you know, and always has done and probably always will do. And I think it's particularly amplified right now for school leaders, in that, you know, their budgets feel tighter than ever. Cost of living, cost of fuel, all of that. Their pupils being in greater poverty, you know, again shining a light on those problems. But then also lots of staffing problems. Mm-hmm. So post-pandemic, it's not just in schools; it's everywhere. You know, people are iller, and people are more likely to not be able to come into work. So you can see why they've got lots and lots of really immediate challenges that are right in their face, to do with money, to do with staffing. I mean, the answer has to be to try and be able to step back from that and see the bigger picture. It's so easy for me in my academic ivory tower to say this. Whether I would be doing it if I was a school leader right now is another matter. But it's obvious to me that the long game is that you have to prioritise the development of your staff at every level. You know, from your trainee teachers, your teaching assistants, right up to senior leaders. And you have to make it really visible and really explicit in your school, and that will help with recruiting people, it will help with holding on to them. Things like mentoring, obviously we've been talking about instructional coaching and mentoring, you know, is at the heart of an awful lot of the reforms that I've been involved in. It does take time, it does take money, you know, it does require people to have the time to do the job properly. But I see it as an investment in the future, because actually if you can prioritise that, and you can build it into how you timetable and how you staff, you know, a full year in advance. Many of the best school leaders will do this. It will save you a lot of money in the long term, because you're not having to constantly refill this sort of leaky bucket of people who just keep leaving and don't get the chance to develop that professional expertise that Andy was telling us about. It takes time. It takes the kind of support that we're talking about here today. It's not a quick fix, but over time it will make all the difference. But as I say, it's easy for me to say this, because I'm not the person who's sort of juggling all those really in-your-face priorities that school leaders must feel like they're up against right now.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Absolutely. I mean, I look at school leaders in awe completely and utterly about everything they have to balance. And Tim, you were a school leader at one stage. I'm going to position that question to you. What do you think are the challenges faced by school leaders when facilitating the development of staff?
Well, all the things that Sam has said, I agree with, but there's a dimension which I would add, which is And it comes down actually to when I was in Birmingham for 10 years, I had what I think now would be called an instructional coach. And every now and again, the coach would spend a day, say we were having an away day, which we used to have probably twice a year at the most, where we kind of got together and thought, where have we got to, where ought we to be going, what's failing, etc. And the next day he would always come in and reflect with me. He'd sit there for just watching the whole thing. And he'd come in, and one day he came in and he put in front of me 2 sides of A5, and he said, look, even you might be able to spend the time to read this very quickly. And I read it very quickly, and it was all about appreciative inquiry and problem solving.
Mm.
And those of you not familiar with that needs to do it. But basically, appreciative inquiry, you identify what's good and what is. You then have a debate with people about how do you extend it, how do you widen it, how do you broaden it, get an action plan. And he said, and Cooper-Ida and Srivastava, who were the 2 people I read about, were saying, look, that's energy creating. And you need 3 parts of that for every part of problem solving. So you identify a problem, etc. So I think the instructional coach needs to be thoughtful about the balance between appreciative inquiry and problem solving. I remember, however, one extra thing, Haili and Sam, which was shortly afterwards, I was being inspected by Ofsted, and it was a guy who all of you will remember, well, many of you all will remember, called Chris Woodhead. And he and I didn't get on terribly well. I mean, he made sort of Amanda Spielman look like a sort of good luck fairy, as it were. I was suffering at the hands of Chris Woodhead, and I always did, and we were having rows. And I showed him this stuff which I'd got from my instructional coach, and he kind of curled his lips in scorn. And I said, well, there is a 3rd way. And I said, it's called ensuring compliance. You decide what's right, you insist that everybody does it, you regulate and inspect, and you punish the deviants and the inadequates. And he said, that's just what I believe in. And I think that when a school leader is now faced by the many things that DFE tell you to do, the danger is that you move even to ensuring compliance. You know, we talk about we're going to all sing from the same song sheet on a particular thing, sometimes called non-negotiables. I think whether CPD runs well is dependent on the things that Sam said, but also avoiding too heavy ensuring compliance and being keenly aware of appreciative inquiry. And then you'll have a culture that will support professional development.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Lots of nods coming from here, Tim. Definitely. No disagreements there. Before I pass on to Andy, I do just need to say we're having some reports of some people struggling with their connection if they're watching this event on our website. If you are, pop over to Twitter. I think the connection there is fine, but we will be recording this and posting it out to people next week who've registered anyway. Andy, over to you. I know Tim and Sam touched on some things there from your perspective of working with a vast amount of schools on professional development. What do you think the challenges school leaders face are?
To be honest, they're very significant at the moment, aren't they? There's a lot going on, and I don't have a great deal to. I mean, how do I follow an act like this? But what I would say is, moving rather to sort of like the advice, I suppose, is that when I've been into schools where there's really fantastic professional development, the professional development seems to be a consequence of people doing their job rather than an additional layer placed on top. Yeah. It's integrated into the way we do things. So when you see we're having a departmental meeting, that is a professional learning opportunity. And if it's structured in the right kind of way, we can attend to any other business and have a professional learning experience. So that's one of the things that's very evident is it's integrated in. My father used to say the warp and weft of what people used to do in schools, and I promised myself I'd never use that term again. But it's definitely evident when you engage with a school that's kind of got it right. And I'm also sort of mindful that the entire culture in a school that's got it right is a little different as well. I sort of sometimes it's a little bit like an engine, when you've got a big, powerful engine, which is one of those schools that it's just like integrated things, then it doesn't take an awful lot of effort to get moving. But where it's difficult, it's like a little tiny engine on a moped when you go into a school where it's not right, and it's an awful lot of noise and an awful lot of fuss, but it doesn't actually get you moving very fast. So that's my main thing, is like, and that's one of the objectives we've had with UnityPD, is to move these professional learning experiences closer to what people are doing on a day-to-day basis, rather than having Iris connectors being something else that I'm doing, something on top of my responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think you can feel that culture. It's tangible, isn't it, when you walk into a school? My colleague at Iris Connect, Vesna, and I went to BSB in Brussels last week, and we got that feeling straight away that professional development was just really part of the culture there. So I absolutely agree.
Well, it goes back to number one. Was it number one on your not your list? It was the previous slide. No, it was prior to that, sort of, that, because teachers are talking to teachers about learning.
Yes.
That's a thing.
And I think it's just a shame, actually, that outside of our sort of ECT years, where we get that dedicated time to do that, we don't get enough time to do that as an experienced teacher, do we? Definitely. Now, I'm going to move on to the second question that actually touches on something that Andy spoke about when he was sort of presenting our research behind UnityPD, which is about instructional coaching. We've seen a lot of schools move towards this model. A lot of sort of early career support is moving towards a kind of type of instructional coaching. So do we think that instructional coaching is for everyone? So quite, I suppose, controversial question, but a really interesting one. Sam, I'm going to start off with you again, because I know that obviously you were quite heavily involved in a lot of the sort of reforms of the CCF, etc. So I'll be interested to hear your views.
I think a lot of what we've heard today, both from Tim and from Andy and from yourself, Haili, gives a really good background to what I'm going to say, which is I think it definitely has a place for everybody, and at different points in their careers it will have a different level of emphasis. So I am a fan for trainee teachers and for early career teachers, but even for those, I don't think it's the full answer. If you go back to Tim's presentation and all the different aspects of being a really expert teacher, the instructional bit is one aspect of it. It's not going to help you, I don't think, fully with all of the others. So Andy, your example of learning to drive was brilliant and absolutely relevant. And one of the things I like about instructional coaching is I think it addresses something that can be and has been missing, particularly in ITT, which is the bit I know most about, where we haven't been as specific and as intentional as we could be at really drilling down into nitty-gritty bits of practice, which are the things that actually keep trainee teachers awake at night if somebody doesn't help them with. So I think it has a really good place in really helping them to sort of walk step by step through. I don't know, how do you get this class of year 3 from the carpet to their table? That's a really kind of basic example. There are much more sophisticated examples that I could have given. But for me, I know that's one that kept me awake for quite a long time in my first teaching practice. So it definitely has a role, but I think there's a danger it can be too narrow, too rigid. It doesn't have to be, of course, it's many things to different people. We're talking about instructional coaching as if we were all working with one sort of contested definition, and that's not really true. But it can be narrow, it can be rigid, which is its strength, as I've just said, for certain situations, but a severe limitation for others. You said yourself, Haili, that you worry about whether we're taking away sort of the sense of agency and the sense of my own professional judgment as an expert teacher, and I think that it can feed that. Certain approaches to it can feed that potential. If it feels like this is basically a formula that I'm taking you through, and once you've mastered it, you've got the answer, and we know that expert teaching is much more complicated than that. So it's definitely got a place, and I support the sort of all the reforms kind of giving it some prominence, but I also worry that some people are talking about it like, now we have the answer. This is the answer. Get this sorted, and everybody will be an expert. And it's just not that straightforward.
Yeah, 100% agree. Tim, would you like to come in there?
Very quickly, just to say, it would depend for me on who the instructional coach was and what techniques they deployed. So I came across a young teacher about a year ago, and it was in a school which used Iris Connect. So by definition, it was one where, you know, they were enabling teachers to observe their own practice privately, etc. And that young teacher had struggled with an instructional coach who then had moved on, and a new instructional coach came along, and the young teacher made enormous progress. And she put it down to actually the AI and the appreciative inquiry and problem solving element of it, namely that the first one had been pointing out too much that she was doing wrong and applying correction, but she'd lost energy. And the second one reinforced the things that were going well and tweaked the things that were going badly. So I'd be back onto my message for that, and also a plea, which is, if we're going to have instructional coaching, which will link with mentoring, in my view, then we really do need to give some thought to helping people being really good instructional coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just read a recent paper about why, you know, there should be some kind of qualification and training for mentors, and I think that feeds into that as well. Like, you know, there's been lots of research, hasn't there, about how effective teaching and effective coaching are two distinct entities completely. So I couldn't agree more with that. Andy?
Yeah, I think one of the things about it is that it's the terminology has been somewhat unhelpful.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, instructional coaching in terms of you know, the way it's presented, I think people misunderstand that, and they think that the instructional part relates to the way I'm going to be dealt with, as in the way that the means to which this coaching is going to happen. And of course, you know, we know very well that coaching can range from being, you know, zeroed in on very specific skills through to me as a thought partner helping you solve your own problems. And then instructional coaching, i.e. coaching that is focused on what happens in classroom on instruction, you could call it pedagogical coaching or classroom coaching, can range that full gambit. They can go from something that's quite directed and something that's very heavily involved in role play and rehearsal, through to something where we're reflecting together as thought partners. Now, I think that, like, what we're seeing quite a lot of is an embodiment of things at the far end of that spectrum, at the starting end of that spectrum. But there's absolutely no reason at all that we shouldn't be providing support, guidance, and coaching to teachers, potentially from peers, working to a framework for people who have fluid skills and good domain knowledge and have all of these things. But you know, maybe just need some help in terms of their reflection, in terms of their you know, defining their next steps in their direction. So from that point of view, I think the terminology is somewhat unhelpful. One of the things that I did it did make me think of, I think it was something that Sam said actually, was I think it was like, you know, you were worried about this sort of transitioning learners from the mat to their chairs or whatever it might be. I remember a scenario right at the outset, right in the early days of Iris Connect. I was working with a colleague in the US who'd actually set up one of the very early iterations of using video to support teaching coaches and remote coaches. And what they found was this scenario where this really powerful mathematics instructional strategy was in use. But it was only when, and they were getting huge variation in terms of like the impact it was having on learners across the cohort of the research group. But it was only when they used video in order to actually look at what was going on that things were this super powerful strategy that they really understood deeply was falling over at the point at which they were handing out the manipulatives at the start of the lesson. And it's just like the kind of I'm sort of mindful of my parents back in the 80s when the VCR didn't work the first time, and there was this little problem, and then nothing got recorded for 5 years. And it's for the want of a nail, the battle is lost, right? So that's where, wherever you are as a teacher, having the insight and input of someone else, whether they are a mentor or a coach, whether that person is coaching you intensively around skills or just providing you with a sounding board to help you develop, that's triangulation that's necessary to help us put really, really solid things into practice.
Thank you. Now, my last question is one that links a little bit, I think, to being mentored and coached, and it's to do with research and evidence. Now, obviously, we've seen increasingly, I think, in the last decade or so, teachers teaching being much more of an evidence-led profession or research-led profession. And I think some teachers, are too busy, very busy in their own classrooms with sort of competing, priorities that are going on. How do we encourage teachers to use evidence more effectively? How can we encourage them to be more critical consumers of research as well? And Andy, I'll start with you.
Yikes.
I just like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, well, absolutely. There was I drifting off, waiting for Sam to tell me what to say, because I'll just follow her. But anyway, I think that it's a fascinating space. I mean, most teachers' experience of educational research is a very loud thump as a book gets dropped on their table. And if we look at the reality of the people's day-to-day experience, the notion that I'm going to be able to engage with that within the constraints that I've got is extremely hard, really, really hard. I think it's, and also the technology's not quite been there to sort of serve things up when people need them in context. And I think that's one of the things that we've been working on so hard is to, I don't want to dumb it down. I don't want to be in a scenario, but in fact, definitely not. We need the richness and the fullness of the data and the findings, but it's just serving it up when people need it. I think that's one of the main kind of take homes there. I think the other part of it is that, I think we can be sort of forgiven sometimes for thinking that only the current things that are in vogue are effective. And I think that's one of the, I haven't seen, not much recent research looking at group learning, looking at, there's been some around dialogue and oracy and these other elements. But the weight of research over the years tells us that these things are important alongside effective instruction, alongside good use of questioning and all these sort of things. So I think one of the things that's really, really important was the question related to school leaders to some degree. How can school leaders help engage?
Well, just how can they help? How can we help teachers? How can school leaders?
Yeah, I think it's just providing that range of research and giving them snapshots of it when it's necessary, where it's helpful, but not dropping a buck on them but also integrating it interleaving it with what else we're doing. And I talked about like how a department and a good school, this is just integrated in what we do. Well, making sure that there's a slot for that in our departmental meetings where someone can bring something new to the table, etc. So that's my perspective. But I think we should hand over to the experts on it, really.
Well, I'm going to hand over to Tim next, actually, because you talked about dropping a book. I wouldn't like to drop About Our Schools on anybody's head, Tim. I think they'd be collapsing. That's definitely the biggest education book I've ever read, and it was brilliant, by the way. So I'm going to go on to you.
All right, but I've also written, and it's available free online.
Oh.
So I'm not going to get anything from it. Essential Pieces in the Jigsaw of a Successful School. And it's only 30 pages long, so that's nice and simple. But I wouldn't claim that it was well researched, you see. That's the interesting point. So back to the research bit. It seems to me that the most important thing I've read in the last 10 years is a book by Nancy Cartwright and Jeremy Hardy called Evidence-Based Policy Making, A Practical Guide. And in that book, they talk about why do some things that work very well, even using controlled trials, etc., like the Education Endowment Fund research, why is it that some work well in one context and not in another? And so they explore how when you're applying something that research is telling you ought to think about, there are there are two elements of importance. One is vertical, so that if you're going to implement the change, you certain steps you take, and you've got to have the right people taking the right steps in the right way. And then there are horizontal, i.e. it might have worked in that context, but what's different in my context that I need to allow for. So personally, I would be wanting people to know about EEF, contemplate research, actually undertake research, and mini research. I would want people to be talking about what the evidence is, but always conscious that what might work in one context won't necessarily work in another, and that they must understand that if we're introducing change, people need to buy into a very clear purpose and know how you're going to see whether it works when it's finished. Have you got the skills? Have you got the resources? Are there some incentives, and are there clear action plan? Because any research applied either by an individual or a group is going to change things, and you need to know how to do that as well.
Yeah, so I guess that's why that kind of process where you're asking yourself, has this been done in a similar context? You know, is this something that we can sort of implement, and concentrating on that implementation is so
I think
key,
one of
isn't it,
those
really?
things is the difference between evidence-led and kind of evidence-informed
Yes.
practice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pass to Sam now for our last contribution on this before we move on to what we've been doing, our exciting developments for UnityPD. Sam?
Yeah, well, of course, going third, everybody's said it all, really. But I mean, perhaps just using my own words to say what I think has already been said. But for me, it's being a critical consumer of research is probably the most important thing. So Andy talked earlier on about, fads coming and going, and they do. And, you could say that cognitive science and instructional coaching and some of the things that we're talking about today could be used by some as a fad. And I think teaching is particularly vulnerable to it because of all the complexity that we're talking about, exactly what Tim was talking about in terms of all the variables. There's no research which you can sure will give you the answer for what you should be doing in your classroom on Monday morning and knowing it will work. So criticality, there is a reason why we are a graduate profession. Being a graduate means that you're good at complex problem solving and you're good at being critical about the evidence base. But you do need to know there is a evidence base. If I was going to be seen by a doctor tomorrow, I wouldn't want that doctor to just be sort of using a hunch to decide what they thought my symptoms might be telling them. I'd want to know there was an evidence base underpinning their practice. Well, I don't think teachers are any different. But I also agree with what Andy was saying earlier about it's unrealistic to expect them to be able to take academic journals and digest and being able to turn them into something that they can actually action in the classroom. One of the reasons why I'm a really big fan of the Chartered College of Teaching is the Impact Journal and how brilliantly that does all the things that we've been talking about. It does recognise the complexity. It does recognise it's not a simple answer, but it does take what is often very complicated research and turn it into something that you can action, or you can action with your own through your own critical lens. So it's coming back to what I said at the beginning, being a critical consumer of research. And I think the DFE need to also be a critical consumer of research. There's a bit of a danger at the moment. They're very excited by the EEF evidence base that they've got, and I understand why, and it's great that they're actually thinking about evidence, but there's a danger they can think about it in too simplistic a way if we're not careful. Now we've got the answers, we just need to tell teachers what to do, and everything will work.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's the danger, isn't it, that we sometimes face, definitely. Well, I could literally have sat and chatted to you all night. So thank you so much for all of your contributions with that. A lot of the stuff that we talked about sort of the pressures that school leaders find themselves under, the budget constraints, this kind of idea of different types of coaching, of sort of teachers having the time to look at evidence, to digest evidence, links very, very nicely to what we have been doing with our brand new set of tools for UnityPD. So now I'm really excited because we get to talk about what we've been working on and how it fits into our new platform. So I'm going to hand over in just a second to our Director of Technology, Matt Newell, who's going to introduce the new platform and also how UnityPD is embedded into it. So hello, Matt.
Hello, hi, yeah. Well, thanks, Haili, and to everyone so far for their presentations and contributions to the discussion. Hopefully, you know, the viewers of this webinar feel a bit like we have on the platform development team. We've been watching with interest this sort of developing discussion around the concept of a professional development approach that, at its core, has this understanding that a broad range of professional development experiences are needed to underpin effective change. And we'll come back to that sort of integration shortly. My role here at IRIS is to balance a number of factors when considering our product roadmap. So clearly a significant factor that now needs to be considered is how can we embody the concepts of this developing PD proposition alongside other factors such as our current technology, the latest technology and the latest best practices, feedback from our users and partners in terms of usability of various things or product ideas that they've got, along with the wider body of educational research. As Andy pointed out, you know, it's not just the latest and greatest we need to look at, we need to look at the historical educational research and effective mechanisms as well. So once we sort of went through a process of distilling these various elements and their influence on what our product roadmap should be, it was clear that there were some driving forces behind a sort of considerable revamp that we wanted to make of the solution. Now, I'm not going to go into the sort of technical things that we've done, but I would like to talk about the sort of driving forces behind what we've done. So one of which is a sort of fairly easy concept to communicate, which is that the user interface and elements of our user experience needed to be redesigned in line with some feedback. Elements of it were good, elements of it needed improving, and that user experience needed to be redesigned in such a way as to build in some of these key concepts in this developing PD solution, so they're at the heart of the platform. The user experience that we developed needed to remain familiar, so that our current users didn't feel entirely lost when they entered the system again. So we needed to make sure that there was a familiarity with the previous way that it was built, but those improvements were included. And crucially, really, that this wasn't just a cosmetic facelift, that we actually replaced some of the core technologies that we put to use. Put simply, this is so that we can have a better end result from what we invested our time in doing and for the user, but also to provide us with velocity into another round of planned improvements after a new platform was delivered. We didn't want this to be a sort of one hit process of launching some new features. We wanted to give ourselves the room to maneuver to continue that velocity of delivering new things for our users, because our roadmap extends beyond what we're launching now into other features. And also, obviously, our intention is to continue to listen to our customers and research and continue to develop the proposition that we have. So in parallel with the education team working on a professional development solution, the development team has been working on these objectives. And I'd like to show you a little bit of what we've done on the platform before taking a look at how that PD solution fits into that. And hopefully that will all make sense. So if I can share my screen. Here we are. So for those of you that are familiar with Iris Connect, this probably looks quite different, better on your first impression, I hope. However, many of the core concepts around how the system fits together are the same. For instance, your sort of main navigation, now placed over here on the sort of left-hand side, contains some familiar items on it. We're currently on the dashboard, which gives you notifications letting you know what's happening around the platform that is relevant to you. If you think we could be doing a little bit more with this space, you're right. And in fact, what you'll see a little bit later on when we incorporate UnityPD, the professional development solution, in, you'll see how that sits on this dashboard and becomes a central part of the platform. This user account, as we didn't want to spoil things for launching and showing you the UnityPD piece, hasn't got that activated at the moment. So it's just a dashboard with your notifications. You'll see how that changes when UnityPD is activated. And just to say, yeah, the sort of layout of all of the items within the platform is very, very similar, although it looks very different. So you have your home, you have reflections, or put simply, for people new to Iris Connect, this is where you have your uploaded lessons and lessons shared directly with you. This is where they're listed and where you can find them. We have groups, and these are collaborative multimedia spaces in which users within your school or network of schools can engage with each other around practice and theory and have discussions, that sort of thing. We have our forms still. Again, for people new to Iris Connect, these are customizable rubrics that you can build and use inside those reflections, inside your lesson videos, to be able to analyze and reflect on various things and collect data. And lastly, Rooms, which is our integrated video conferencing solution on the platform. The main sort of driver behind that is it's all integrated with videos and reflections. So if you have a video conference on this, your video will end up in your reflections and can be shared, and tools can be used on it. So just a sort of overview and orientation there, and a sort of quick look at how that UI has changed. To go back to reflections, what I'll do is I'm just going to pick out a few areas within here as examples of where we put that sort of energy and effort with regards to sort of user experience. For instance, even on this page, previously reflections were packed full of information at the top level, lots of detail here, and lots of buttons as the platform has grown and the features have grown. One of the new philosophies that this is an embodiment of is that we wanted to just present the very simple information at the top level, the kind of information that people need to be able to sort of navigate around the platform, that for 90% of people will be fine. So the name, the title, who owns it. The rest of it is now hidden. You have just the key items that are available to you. The review button, so you can watch the lesson. The sharing button, so you can decide to share it with somebody new or to remove it. And then the rest of the complexity is hidden under a very obvious sort of menu button where you can find all of the other things you might want to do. So that's just one example of where we've sort of taken something that previously may have felt a little more complex and sort of produced a more simplistic version. If I dip into having a look at one of these reflections, again, hopefully what you'll see is something that to an previous Iris Connect user is relatively sort of familiar from the perspective of over here on the left-hand side, you have the video that's been collected and uploaded to your reflection, your lesson. And over here on the right-hand side, you have all of the tools that you can use to analyze, look at, comment on that video. This is an example of the sort of dual reflection. If we go back and have a look, you see that layout works just as well for a video that's been uploaded with just a single view, not the dual view. Just to sort of touch on the sort of refinements and improvements that we've made. Again, these tools are all very similar, but for instance, in comments, it's all the same. Probably one of our most popular tools. You can still simply click on the various notes that have been created, and they're all time linked to the video, so that provides a quick link to that moment in the video. Think about that in terms of either if you're making private notes to yourself, or if this is a shared reflection, this could be a dialogue or a conversation with a coach. All of this feedback, all of these notes are linked to actionable and contextualized moments within that lesson, so you can still just make notes and they get dropped onto the timeline and they're relevant. The other elements are still here. You can still use those observational forms and rubrics that we discussed earlier on, and I think Andy's going to be showing a little bit more detail how those are used in a better context in terms of UnityPD in a little bit. And videos, the ability, so a reflection can be multiple video clips that are lined up and played. And one of the sort of areas that we've put some energy and effort into is video editing, for instance. A very popular tool. It allows you just to take a segment of a lesson and share that, and for a variety of reasons with regards to how confident teachers maybe feel about sharing the whole hour, all the way through to relevance of perhaps not wanting to distract someone with an hour's video. Video editing is really popular, but the feedback was that it wasn't intuitive enough. So in here, we've redesigned it where you select your video, you hit the edit button, and now you have hopefully what is a much more intuitive interface to be able to drag and find the exact segment of video that you're looking for. And once you've done it, same process before, you can hit next and either pop it into a new reflection or select one of your existing ones to add it into. A sort of final note on sort of that focus on usability that I wanted to discuss. This whole screen has been, and all of the screens have been carefully redesigned to be incredibly responsive to different screen sizes, and to make sure that we're using the real estate on these screens very well to make sure that we are showing the users the important features, and that that works for them on multiple devices. So not only does this page work really well, if we crunch it all the way up to being the size of a mobile device, you can see how all of the elements have squidged down or moved around to make it still possible to review your commentary timeline, make comments, etc. And also another element that we found was that, you know, there are quite a few features on the reflection page. Various features are here. One nice thing that we've added is the ability just to hit this button called focus mode, which will just take away all of the other distractions. It takes away the side menus of the application, the top menus, all of the tools you're not likely to be using, and just gives you the ability to focus on the video and use the comments and the forms and things. And it makes better use of the real estate as well. If you're on a small device, it gets rid of all the menus and things that could be distracting and gives you more space to use things like the comments. So just pulling out another example there really of where that sort of energy has gone into looking at features that already existed, but how could we provide them in a more intuitive way and in a more useful way for the users. So just a little bit of background there before we talk about UnityPD as to the energy that's gone into redelivering the front end of the platform. So how does the updated platform, this new platform that I'm showing you, integrate with our new professional development solution, UnityPD? Well, let's take a look.
Introducing UnityPD, a unified professional learning solution that unites everything that the research shows is needed to lead to sustainable, positive change in teaching practice. UnityPD helps teachers to gain deep classroom insights through secure video capture, analysis and feedback from peers or coaches. Define informed development goals based on their chosen area of focus and insights gained from their own classroom practice. Better understand teaching theory and models through 24/7 access to an instructional palette of evidence-based learning modules, built in conjunction with domain experts and illustrated with video examples from real teachers in real classrooms. Bridge the gap between theory and practice by following a personalized coaching, collaborative or self-reflective pathway, guiding teachers step by step to implementing what they have learned into their own classrooms. UnityPD is suitable for teachers at different stages of their career, in diverse contexts. Let's take a look at some examples. First example.
Judy wants to develop deeper thinking and sharing of ideas in her classroom. She logs into Iris Connect looking for resources that could help. Under UnityPD, she finds a learning module around dialogue and oracy and decides to give it a try. She starts by reading about the research and theory behind effective classroom dialogue, sees video examples of these strategies in action, and engages in conversations around oracy with teachers across the Iris Connect community. After getting a better understanding of the theory, Judy can now select from a choice of practical pathways to help her transfer what she's learned into practice. She selects the reflective practice pathway and is guided through a process of recording her lessons and reflecting on what she sees. This process is supported by a robust framework which helps her understand which strategies will best meet the needs of her learners. As she starts practicing these new strategies, she uses integrated rubrics to refine her technique over time, and pathway assignments to record her learning and progress. Finally, the pathway supports her to evaluate the impact of her changes on the learning in her classroom and enables her to share her progress and insights with others. Second example. Mike provides coaching support to other teachers in his school. The teachers he works with vary in their level of experience, and Mike has always been uncomfortable with taking a one-size-fits-all approach to development. He recognizes that different teachers require different levels of structure and guidance, and uses UnityPD to create coaching pathways that map to the needs of each teacher. Each pathway he creates is a private space in which videos can be deconstructed and ideas shared. It contains a tailored framework of PD mechanisms that that have been shown to promote sustainable developments in classroom practice, like the discussion of theory, modelling, rehearsal of technique, and feedback on practice, with each pathway automatically recording progress. Mike gets a lasting record of skill development for his coachees over time. Third example, Alina leads a science department and wants to promote subject-specific professional learning with her team. She creates a collaborative pathway on UnityPD and invites her colleagues to participate. The pathway provides a structure which supports the team to collaboratively discuss classroom videos, decide on an area of focus, and share reflections on practice. In time, this network grows to encompass the other science departments in her trust, and as more colleagues share their insights, it forms a centralized library of subject matter specific technique to underpin induction, mentoring, and coaching activities. UnityPD, everything for expert teaching.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully that's given you an insight into what we've been up to with regards to UnityPD. Certainly a good sort of high-level overview. But to introduce a little bit more depth to that, one of the co-creators of the UnityPD program, Haili, will start to walk us through and talk us through the actual the content itself.
Thanks, Matt. So we're going to go into a little bit more depth here. You can see on the screen that Matt has very kindly shared for me there, because I'm having some trouble with mine at the moment, that we've got 6 learning modules, and they're focused around kind of high leverage instructional strategies, which evidence tells us make a real difference to our teaching and in turn to the outcomes of our students as well. So those 6 groups that we currently have, we have behaviour, instruction and scaffolding, questioning, dialogue and oracy, collaborative learning and assessment and feedback at the moment. That's just a start. We will be working with some of our partners who are experts in their fields to build more resources. So if we go into the behaviour group, if that's okay, Matt, if we click into it, into the instructional palette of behaviour, thank you. You can see on the left-hand side there, on the right-hand side, we've got some pathways that Andy's going to talk to us in a bit more depth about in just a second. But on the left-hand side, if we click down to the read theory, for each of these groups, there are the pathways that Andy will go into in just a second, but there are also these theory groups as well. So you can see there we've structured the theory groups around Rolf Freshwater and Jasper's What, So What, Now What. On the front page here that Matt is scrolling through, you can see that we've got the rationale for what this group will be focusing on, what's being covered. You've got the opportunity to join one of our film clubs where we'll be looking at some clips of real practice in action and discussing them with other teachers, some information about how to use the group and our objectives as well. So if we scroll back up to the top and onto the left-hand side, we've got introducing the topic. And as we go into these groups, we've got some fantastic experts, some expert teachers who've done sort of mini micro lectures for us about the importance of some of these instructional strategies. For any of you who are on Twitter, you may follow Clive Hill, who's absolutely brilliant. He's a lead teacher of science at Alveston Moor Academy. And Clive talks a little bit for a few minutes about why setting the climate for behaviour and high expectations is really important. In every single group, there's a little bite-sized theory video from me where we run through some of the theory, which links to what our panel was saying earlier about teachers not really having time to sit and read vast swathes of academic journals. So we've kind of condensed it for you into these little videos. So if we move on from that first page, then that then leads us to some other resources that we've created. Now, as Andy mentioned before, we're at Iris Connect, we're all about teachers being able to be the professionals who can choose from a palette of different approaches and instructional strategies. And that's why we don't dictate to teachers what approach they should be taking. So we've set out a couple of different approaches in our behaviour group. We've set out warm strict, that comes from a lot of the work that Doug Lamov does with Uncommon Schools. And we've also set out as well, the restorative practice approach. So within each of these two sections, you can see the restorative practice one here. We've been so lucky to get the fantastic restorative practice expert, Mark Finnis, who's written a brilliant book on restorative practice, to do a mini lecture for us. We dive into and delve into in quite a lot of granular detail some of the strategies that you might find in this approach. We have videos of those strategies being enacted and a collaborative space, a forum where you can discuss those with colleagues from across the world, not just in your own school. For every single one of these pages as well, we have our tangible takeaway strategies that teachers can take away tomorrow and trial in their classroom. And then towards the bottom of each page as well, we might delve into some of the other granular detail of the strategies. I know at the bottom of this page, we also, oh, sorry, it's on the next page, Matt, if you want to click through. We also have some other stuff to think about, like how you apply it in the classroom. We have some scenarios there that teachers can take part in and discuss with other teachers on our collaborative boards, approaches that they might take, whether that be from a warm, strict or a restorative approach palette. That's entirely up to the teacher. You can have those really rich professional dialogues with people from across the world there. And we've also got a fantastic little clip there from John Bailey. Many of you will remember John, legendary school leader and behaviour expert advisor from Teachers TV. John does a little bit of input for us there on rewards and sanctions and how that leads to behaviour. And then we also have something on behaviour with John that you can order in the group store as well, that you can see the link to there. So that then leads us, after kind of looking at the practical application for it, for the option to register for one of our film clubs. You can see their film club screening. So if you go onto our Eventbrite page, you will see all the information for the upcoming film clubs there. We're just sorting the dates out for those, so they should be there in the next week or so. You can then see what we've done is we've spoken to an actual teacher for our teacher takes. So we've got videos from teachers, school leaders who are talking to us about how some of the research and evidence that we've got in this group, some of the strategies have actually affected their teaching. So then at the end of every single group, we know teachers are busy. We have our top takeaways. I've taken into account cognitive load here and never have more than sort of 4 or 5 top takeaways. And then that time to reflect, which we know is really, really vital for the development of teachers as well. There's chance to reflect and discuss with other teachers. Now, something that we are working on at the moment as well is this idea about contributing as well to some of these groups. We work with an amazing amount of teachers, huge expertise that we have in our partner schools, and we will be launching a library of practice as well. So you can see there in the link that says contribute, share video examples that Matt's clicking on now. There is the opportunity as well for you to share a little reflection, a little video of you enacting one of those strategies or another behaviour strategy, and you can upload those. We have a filter that you can put on as well, so you can anonymise it and you can share them and really contribute to this development of teachers kind of across the world, really. So it's all very, very exciting. So Andy, I think I'm going to pass over to you now just to talk about the pathways in a little bit more depth that link to these.
Wonderful. Thank you, Haili. Yes, I mean, so what you've seen there is a deep dive into just one of the kind of evidence-based groups that we've built on the platform and all the various kind of learning interactions that sit within that. But of course, we all know that that's not enough. We need to bridge the gap between theory and practice. So the way to think of it on Iris Connect is that these are the theory groups. The video and the work you're doing in classrooms is the practice, and the bridge that sits between them are these pathways. So the way that we access a pathway on Iris Connect is we click on a particular domain. So for example, we're having a look at dialogue and oracy. And then from here, I could access that very group that, well, actually not a similar group to what Haili just showed you. But then sitting alongside this are pathways. And what pathways are saying is, how do you want to apply this? How do you want to learn? And so within the space at the moment, we have reflection pathways. So this is something that I could take, and it will provide me with a framework and guidance through the process of engaging with both the theory and the evidence from my classroom, collating that together, identifying a strategy I want to implement, implementing it with deliberate practice, and then evaluating its impact on classrooms. But equally, I could also be engaging in a coaching activity. And we recognize that coaches, teachers at different stages of their career or different stages of the skill acquisition process need subtly different frameworks. So this ranges from, at the bottom here, live coaching, where we can actually connect you live to your coachee and provide real-time feedback to help them acquire key skills, through to skills coaching, which is very similar, but it's based on 3 rounds of deliberate practice and feedback afterwards, through to a dialogic approach, which actually sees both coach and coachee bringing video and lesson artifacts together to collaboratively discuss and analyze what's going on in classrooms, come up with a combined plan of action, implement it together, and work together to see the impact. And then there's a facilitative coaching approach, which of course is where we're bringing video together, but we're also, I as coach, I'm operating to help teachers really think through their own problems, identify their own challenges, identify their own solutions, etc. So I'm actually in the account of the lady who's in our video example, and she was reflecting on dialogue and oracy in her own classroom. So let's start with that. I'll show you what that looks like. Judy creates a new practical associated with dialogue and oracy, and this is it. This is a practical, and it walks through. Here we go. Those are the stages of the process that I was outlining earlier. And so what it does is it provides you with guidance about how to go ahead and record a reflection, and also confirmation that you've gone ahead and done that. It's then giving me tools to actually help me reflect more meaningfully on that video itself. So this is the framework that's helping me identify my objectives. So these are the guidance. This is the guidance here. Here are the things that it's suggesting that I do. So watch the video, identify key moments that stand out to you, mark each moment, rewatch them, and consider, are there similarities, are there differences? Pick one that most typifies, consider what happened before, during, and after. Except all of the sort of key reflection skills that we're talking about. So Judy's recorded a video. She'll then go over into the platform and identify and follow that exact same framework, and it will help her refine her thinking about what she's doing in the classroom. It also then asks me to consider what I'm going to do next, how I'm going to implement a change on the basis of what I'm seeing. It'll talk to me about planning. What are the things I need to account for and be able to do that well? And then finally, it's going to ask me to go away and practice my change, whether that's in a role play rehearsal environment or in real life, actually out in classrooms. And so what we can see when we do that, if I'm engaging in deliberate practice, is I can actually analyze my practice against standardized oracy tools here that are going to give me an insight into the progress that I'm making. So I'm identifying where I am in terms of the key features of using body language. For example, my learners are using body language in this classroom. And what that does is very quickly and easily takes me to a scenario where I can actually see my progress over time. I've used this tool in 3 lessons, and I can see that the learners' behaviors, in terms of their ability to listen and respond, their vocabulary, their rhetorical techniques, etc., are progressing from one stage to the next over the course of time. And of course, that's showing me that my role as teacher, the things that I'm doing, are having the desired impact. But bear in mind also that Judy isn't just a teacher reflecting, she's also got the responsibility to support and develop others. And so that's one of the things that she's able to do, again, focusing in on dialogue and oracy. She can now say, I know, I'm going to work with that teacher, and I think they will benefit most from a kind of facilitative approach where I'm supporting them to understand their needs. Click on Start. You go through and add your coachee. Start the practical. And what that's going to do is create a private space that's for me, and in this case, Andrew. And in that space is we can go through this exact same process, but we can use the space to discuss, to bring together our videos, and most importantly, to track our progress. So what you'll see is as we go through this process, we end with one where we can say that we've finished. Complete pathway. And what that does is it will then show me back on my dashboard of Oracy that this particular pathway has been completed. So you can see that I've got a facilitative coaching process that's complete, and also a reflection journey that I'm only 40% of the way through. And if I want to resume, I can do so now. So that's an overview of the various different ways that pathways can work to support us bridge the gap between theory and practice. And so one of the key things really for us to say about all of this, or everything that you've seen today, is that UnityPD is going to be implemented for all Iris Connect users and available to every one of our partner schools that we're working with. And also, we recognize that our pathways, our content might not be your priorities or the way you do it. And so one of the things that we're working very hard to deliver, and will be doing shortly, is the abilities for you to create your own pathways and to reference those pathways against evidence bases or research or theory that matters to you. So this is the starter for 10. This is our initial foray into this field, and we look forward to working with you to build out these professional learning experiences that matter.
Thanks, Andy. I think we're going to go to questions. We have had a few questions through, so hopefully between the three of us we'll be able to answer them. If I don't read your question out, please do get in touch with us. I'll give you the details of how to get in touch with us at the end. So the first question is, are the modules self-explanatory to the extent my teachers can just follow them independently?
100%. So I've got a bit of reverb going on. Could you mute yourself, Matt? That's it. Yeah, 100%. Within the pathway is guidance, both for the, so let's say we're going on a coaching pathway, then what we'll do is the pathway itself provides guidance to the coachee, step by step. This is how you record a lesson. This is how you share it. This is the what you can do to reflect on it. But there's also a parallel coaches guidance as well. So what happens is the pathway knows that I'm the coach, and will present me slightly different information and provide me a link in the background to our instructional coaching guide, which goes through the big picture theory about instructional coaching, but then also a granular sort of step-by-step support to helping you operate either as a dialogic coach or a facilitative coach or as a skills coach.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think probably the next question links maybe a little bit to what you were just saying, which is we've got an induction tutor here who's asking, can I track the progress of my mentors, mentees through their practicals?
Yeah, absolutely. We've included a, I'm muted, Rico.
Oh, no, you're talking.
Oh, no, sorry, I was muted, but now I'm not. Yes, we've included a screen that administrators of Iris Connect can see the various pathways that have been started by the teachers within the school, and see the progress within the pathway, who's completed what. Importantly, because Iris Connect, at the heart of it, is permissioning. You can't poke into those and see the individual and private things those teachers might be doing in a private reflective space, but you can see that they've started the pathway. You can see the progress they've made and whether they've completed it or not. At the moment, that's just quite a simple view for you to be able to filter by the modality, whether it was coaching or reflection, having a look at the different topics that people are looking at and see their status. That is something that we're aware people will want more and more from, so we'll be producing more statistics, more graphs, more in that space too. But 100% you can see an overview of progress within your organisation.
Fab, thank you. And then probably got time for one more. This is sort of a double question. Are there plans to create more, and can any of the content be downloaded? So I'm guessing when they're saying are the plans to create more, they probably mean the sort of theory learning modules. And I can answer that one. Yes, is the simple answer. Where I know we're already thinking about working with a fantastic SEND provision school that's one of our partners, and looking at a group on sort of the SEND strategies. Some of the content can be downloaded as well under the tangible strategies in the theory groups. There is the opportunity to download a PDF of those strategies. Anything to add, Matt and Andy?
This is the start of a journey for us,
Yeah.
I think. You know, the amount of energy that's gone on, the amount of thinking, the amount of energy, the amount of work that's gone into producing this is because we're committed to it. And from our point of view, yeah, I think you put it well. That the sort of this is the start of a 10. These are the topic areas that research has shown us that we think is most important to present first. We both want to continue to invest in developing that content so that other people don't have to, but also to provide more and more tools for people to be able to generate content for their organization that's relevant to them and customize the content that we have, as well as perhaps, you know, an end result perhaps being that they would have a topic picker for their organization where they can select from our menu of topics or add their own in. So this is a developmental journey that we're on, and, you know, committed to keeping adding value throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have so many schools that we work with unbelievable expertise in there that, you know, we'd love to be that kind of vehicle for bringing teachers together and collaborating and sharing their expertise. So that just brings me to kind of close this afternoon's live event. I just want to say thank you to Sir Tim Brighouse, to Professor Sam Twistleton, to Matt and Andy, and to everybody who's presented today as well. We have had lots of other questions. If you want to find out more, if you want to ask us questions, please do pop onto our website, irisconnect.com. And when you go on there, you can speak to somebody live. It's not a bot. They're brilliant people who are sat at the other end of the computer, and will point you in the right direction. But we're happy to have a chat on Twitter. If you've enjoyed tonight's event, please do tweet about it, share the live stream, and we're really looking forward to chatting more with you about UnityPD. So we're going to leave you with a little bit of a thank you from us now. You know, teachers do an absolutely brilliant job, and this is a thank you from our children and us to say thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you for being a great teacher, and thank you for being so funny.
I'd like to thank teachers for always being nice in lessons and around school.
Thank you, teachers, for making school fun and the work fun.
Thank you, teachers, for teaching me that.
I'm so thankful that you taught me to speak in Irish.
I thank my teacher for being so passionate about French.
Thank you so much for helping me with my maths. Thank you for my teachers who make work to be fun.
She has made me want to become an author, so I would like to thank Miss Curtis.
Thank you for explaining everything so well.
Thank you so much for being my teacher.
Thank you very much.